I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual. 起立，面向佛堂，参加先鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，参加各位的传世鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。
Good morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you happen to be at the moment. And welcome to our online Tao study group. Didn't get a chance to see how many people we have on this morning, but I'm happy to know you're all here. It's a wonderful thing that we have going on, and very special. I'm happy to be a part of it, and glad you're all listening in. I'm going to tie up the discussion on the principle of softness this week. I've spent about, the last 3 or 4 weeks at the Tai Chi school working on this very concept with the class. It's this is not beginner or intermediate level training. This is some pretty advanced Tai Chi Chuan training. And in the process of trying to help folks understand this, particularly yesterday, because we're kind of approaching the culmination of the principles in class as well. I was able to coalesce some observations that I've been making, and thought perhaps those observations might be useful here as well. I think you may find that they are. One of the things that I observe in the class when I talk about moving without the intent to cause harm, or moving with benevolence, is that people have a difficult time reconciling a martial discipline and the process of defending oneself from an attacker without the intent to harm the other person. Those two things on their face seem to be antithetical, and I've found that helping people to understand that they are not can be difficult, that it's something that a person has to be able to internalize and understand on their own, and that requires a process of some self-discovery. It's not something that I've found that I can adequately explain in such a way that the light bulb just goes on and everybody all of a sudden gets it. I think this one is one of those concepts that's a little tougher than that. I think particularly here in the West, where we tend to see things as black or white, true or false, where we're looking at things in opposition instead of as complementary, it becomes more difficult to consider protecting oneself without the intent to do harm. And so, in an effort to explain how that works, I pointed out that the largest component of that has nothing to do with the attacker or the opponent, but it has everything to do with us maintaining our own inner peace, internal center, moral compass, integrity, all of those things, so that we're acting from a perspective of what we believe is the right and most appropriate thing to do in the situation that we're in. I think, particularly in the martial disciplines, that an individual who doesn't understand those things about him or herself is handicapped in the defensive arts to the degree that they do not. I've observed very easy for these kinds of life lessons in practice to degenerate into a series of practice sessions revolving around technique. And I've seen that happen in the school as well, partially because it's fun. Everybody does seem to enjoy the practice, but also because it's what's comfortable for people in those settings. When you're dealing with a defensive situation and somebody intends to do you harm, at least in the context of martial training, the typical defense involves utilizing some kind of technique to prevent that from occurring. And it becomes difficult for people to elevate their thinking to the perspective of not participating in the conflict at all. And so that's kind of the direction that I'm working on getting everybody to go, where we manage the situation to the point where no conflict exists, instead of having to deal with an individual who's already engaged in a confrontation. That's going to be, I guess, a matter of some practice. One of the things that supports that inner peace, tranquility, strength, the focus and concentration and abilities necessary to subvert the intent to do harm is self-knowledge. Lao Tzu says that a person who understands others is intelligent, and a person who understands themselves is wise. And there is probably not a lot of more profound teachings that I've ever heard when I contemplate the depth and breadth of that single statement. It is not possible to move with benevolence and without the intent to cause harm, without a high degree of self-knowledge and self-understanding. And it is impossible to understand the intent of an opponent, no matter what flavor of opponent we're looking at. I'll get to that in a moment, without first understanding ourselves. It's important not just to know what we can do to another person. It is perhaps more important to understand very thoroughly what we should do to another person. For myself, and I'll just speak for me at the moment, because I don't want to speak for anyone else. But for me, I understand very clearly what I am capable of inflicting on another human being if I absolutely am forced to do so. And because I understand what I can do to them, I absolutely, with all of my heart, wish not to do those things. I don't want to make somebody hurt as badly as I can hurt them. I don't want to injure them as badly as I can injure them. I certainly don't want to kill them. I'd rather not even argue with them. And so, by understanding myself, and by understanding what I'm willing to do, that is the difference between what I can do and what I should do. You know, I've drawn certain boundaries for myself, for my own conduct, my own behavior, my own thoughts, the way that I conduct my life. so that I don't put myself in a situation where I may be required to inflict the kind of damage on another human being that I'm capable of inflicting. I don't want to do that. If it's at all humanly possible, I'm going to live the rest of my life without ever doing that to someone. When I talk about knowing oneself, in the martial context, that's what I'm talking about. In life, we need to have those same boundaries, those same self-imposed limitations that govern the way we conduct ourselves in business, in our relationships, with complete strangers. When somebody does something we don't appreciate behind the wheel, or cuts in a line at the grocery store or whatever, that understanding needs to be firmly rooted and thoroughly contemplated and well thought out, and hopefully based on some kind of higher spiritual path than just, I don't feel like beating somebody senseless this week. That absolutely is not something that I can teach. It's something that I can help people learn how to realize for themselves. But I can't teach another person where to set their limitations. I can't teach another person what is and isn't appropriate for them. There are some fairly universal guidelines that I think we could all recommend as being beneficial, but I certainly can't insist that somebody accept them. I do know that without understanding those things about ourselves, that we cannot understand our opponent. And understanding the hearts and minds of others is the holy grail of martial practice. My students fairly frequently tell me that I make our Tai Chi practice look like magic. It's not magic. There's no illusion, no trickery, no magic, no sleight of hand involved. There is countless years of hard practice and a lot of skill that allows me to misdirect, redirect, move, and help other people to get to where they were going, kind of, sort of, so that I don't have to hurt them and I don't wind up getting hurt. But that occurs because I understand where the other person's going almost before they do. And that isn't magic, that's practice. It isn't luck, it's skill. The wonderful thing about that statement means that anybody can learn to do it. But you can't understand the opponent until you understand yourself. And that journey is a little more difficult than it sounds on the surface. The other thing that I've observed with remarkable frequency is the tendency of people to manage the scenario instead of managing the situation. Particularly when we get into weapons training, people tend to fixate on the weapon and not on the person. It's very easy to lose sight of the fact that a weapon is only an extension of the opponent's body. A stick or a knife or whatever becomes a part of the hand and arm, and as such is really no more dangerous than the hand or arm is by itself. But because it looks scary and sharp and long and whatever, extends the reach of the opponent, people get fixated on it, they get afraid of it, they get nervous, and then they get hurt. Fixating on technique, on particular scenarios in martial practice, and what to do when your opponent does A, B, C, or D, is truly not beneficial to a student except at the beginning levels, because life just doesn't work that way. What I explain with a good deal of frequency is that they need to be able to gather their chi and be prepared to respond to a situation within one breath. Because your opponent on the street isn't going to give you 10 minutes to relax and warm up. You're going to have to deal with things as they happen. You're going to have to respond as things occur. Once again, life is very much like that. We don't always get the opportunity to prepare for what comes at us. And so the question becomes, are we going to manage the immediate attack, if you will? Or are we going to manage the situation so that there doesn't have to be one? That's sometimes a difficult question to see past. There is always a certain amount of confusion as people are learning these concepts that's created in thinking about the difference between defense and intent. While it is necessary to prevent someone else from harming us, it is not necessary to hold anger or rage or hatred in our hearts and minds for that person because of their actions. This is at the root of moving without the intent to cause harm. I don't hate anybody who's ever attacked me. In any situation, whether it was in competition or on the street or where, doesn't make any difference. I wasn't particularly mad at any of them. In the cases where I'd been practicing for a number of years, there actually wasn't much emotion involved at all. And because the emotional component was removed, there also was not the adrenaline reaction, the fear, the general carrying on that goes on between two people as a conflict unfolds. There simply was taking care of what was going on at the moment, and when that was done, that was it. And while I don't espouse getting into a fight anymore, and that revelation has occurred over the last 10 years, there was a time way back when I'd be sitting here talking to all of you, freely admitting that there were occasions where I could foresee shooting someone in my home. Not anymore. So, we all have the ability to change there, but understand there was a time in my life when managing confrontation included the use of force. At that time, I carried this same confusion. I thought that in order to protect myself, it was necessary, perhaps even desirable, to have some kind of negative emotional feelings towards my opponent so that I could adequately beat the snot out of them. But that thinking is erroneous, and it contributes to the very thing we're trying to prevent. If the philosophy of my school is not to fight, I can't teach my students to utilize negative emotions and anger, because doing that promotes the very violence I'm trying to end. We take the emotions out of it and deal with the situation. However, because we're all human, because we're all subject to our old thinking and old habits, the things we grew up with, the coping skills and mechanisms that we learned from our earliest childhood on, because we have that human nature, our tendency is to revert to the things that we believed were effective when we were younger and when we were learning how to cope with life and deal with stressful or dangerous situations. Anyone here who's approaching my age most likely heard "don't talk to strangers" when you were kids. That's what I heard. All right, from my earliest childhood memories on, don't talk to strangers. They might be dangerous. You don't know what they might do to you. Well, okay. On the one hand, that tends to keep you safe to a degree because you're avoiding people you don't know that might hurt you. On the other hand, it exposes you to risk because you don't learn how to deal with people you don't know. The way that we've taught our children was what I believe to be a little more common sense, perhaps, which is, you don't get in a stranger's car. You don't go with somebody simply because they're an adult. You don't take off with somebody to go find their puppy or take their money or candy or what have you. But if from a safe distance somebody wants to know how to get to some place and you know where that is, you can tell them. If you're at the mall and you're lost, you can go up to the information booth or up to one of the storefronts and say, hey, how do I find this place? Or, gee, would you call my mom and dad? By giving the kids permission to approach people they didn't know under hopefully somewhat safer circumstances, hopefully we gave them the tools to manage an otherwise uncomfortable situation more safely. Now, the Tai Chi training is kind of similar to that. But for those of us who grew up with the mores of don't talk to strangers, well into our own adult lives, many of us still have problems with approaching people we don't know. Why is that? In my case, I have absolutely nothing to fear from them. Even if I had no training at all, I'm positively enormous. Not very many people pick on me. And yet, for me, approaching people that I don't know is very often uncomfortable. Just a thought. We then have the problem of adaptation. I introduce a lot of new concepts, a lot of new ways of thinking, a lot of new technique, a lot of new training in a fairly compressed amount of time in the Tai Chi school. And I expect people to pick that stuff up and run with it, to learn it, to practice it, to internalize it, to use it, hopefully so that it'll help them. I'm gonna say I hope I'm not unreasonable in that expectation. But I have high expectations of my students, and they consistently live up to them. And I'm very proud of all of them. So I think I'm doing okay in that regard. However, every now and again, we hit one of those concepts, such as this one, where internalizing it can be difficult, and learning how to use it can be unwieldy. And so, I've got a couple of folks who are able to explain it, but still aren't able to do it. I have to confess, that causes me to both chuckle and kind of blue screen at the same time. However, I have every confidence they're going to get over on that. It does, however, point out an observation and a common problem of human nature that we should all consider. We all have trouble with adaptation, with creating meaningful and lasting change in our thought processes and the conduct of our lives based on new information. It's that old human nature thing again. It takes work and practice and diligence and discipline to make that new information useful information. And so we should probably be prepared to make that investment. So when we move from the martial arena and into the arena of life, the place where the vast majority of us spend our time, what makes this relevant? Well, here we go. You know, in business, in our dealings with our wives, husbands, children, friends, acquaintances, you know, from time to time, we all lose our center. We allow the emotions of the moment, the heat of the moment, the words and actions of other people to overwhelm our reason. And because of that, we fail to understand ourselves and understand the situation, and then we act too quickly and we say something we didn't mean, or we do something we regret, and we hurt a relationship, or we hurt a person that's close to us. And hopefully, you know, I'm not talking about smacking somebody with a blunt instrument. You know, our words can be more injurious than any martial technique. And the pain can be a lot longer lasting. But it is exactly the same thing that happens when we don't manage a potential fight situation correctly. Okay? We get tied up in the sparring. We get wrapped up in the argument over technique and what to do to our opponent rather than how to end the conflict peacefully and without hurting anyone. We get wrapped around the axle with winning and with imposing our will on the other person, with their submission and our need to be right, instead of being the bigger person and walking away from a fight. We start out with a benevolent intent, but then we cause harm because somebody kicks our ego in the shins, and now we got to turn around and respond. Okay? The second that we start defending our ego self is the second that the benevolent intent goes out the window. And it doesn't make any difference if that's with an armed attacker or with our wife or husband or whoever. In both cases, at some point there was an opportunity not to have that conflict start. And in both cases, we let it happen. We didn't stop it. We didn't manage it. And then we're in trouble. It's human nature to resort to the strategies and coping mechanisms and thinking that worked in the past to manage our lives and our various situations. And so we drag those things into the present because they're the only skills we have. And, you know, more often than not, when we do that, we find out after the fact, unfortunately, that a lot of those coping skills that we acquired when we were growing up just aren't quite the most effective ways of dealing with the issues and situations we run into. It's a growth process. It's a process of change, of evolution, of refinement. Like I said, you know, a little earlier, you guys have all seen me go through this process in moving from, yeah, I'll shoot the guy stealing my TV set, to no, I won't. that sentence leaves my mouth so easily. But the process of getting from one end of it to the other one took years. The problem is reconciling and applying new understanding and information to our old comfort zones and our old ways of doing things. But life demands of us that we find a way to incorporate that better set of answers into our lives. Isn't that why we're all here to begin with? To learn to have a smoother, easier, more joyous, more beneficent life? To refine the mind and allow the Buddha nature to emerge and be freed? To handle our past and current karma and hopefully make our future karma more positive? You know, we all get ourselves into all kinds of conflicts and problems, especially when we get, you know, when the ego gets hurt, when we perceive that somebody has slighted us or offended us or said something they shouldn't have, or when they're just completely out in left field. I have a couple other terms for that, but I'll save those for later. We get into trouble so much because of our egos that we have terms for what happens when that happens, right? When we talk about crimes of passion or knee-jerk reactions or heat of the moment things, those three terms in particular are nearly always invoked because somebody got their pride hurt and then reacted too quickly and too emotionally to what happened. And the unfortunate thing is when we live from that perspective, there can be some pretty severe consequences at the end of those reactions. When we talk about crimes of passion, rightly or wrongly, the picture that always comes to my mind is that of the jealous husband, right? It is the classic murder mystery movie on TV. Either the wife or the husband comes home, finds something going on that shouldn't be, and 112 gauge later, here we go with the procedural cop drama. But those things happen in real life. People do stuff like that. You know, I have a list of rules for my life, and rule number 1 is Mr. Bill goes to jail for nobody. It really is. My kids can quote this. But I got to tell you, you know, from my perspective, Mr. Bill goes to jail for nobody is a pretty good rule number 1. That's the top of my list of better answers. If you're asking me to do something and I may wind up in jail for doing it, the answer is no. But people wind up there every day. This is such an important part of Tai Chi Chuan training. It should be a crucial part of all martial training. And at the sources in Asia, it is. Here in the West, a lot of the times it is not. But because we're all gathered here, and because I understand the importance of this, and because Derek graciously gives me half an hour to bend your ears every Sunday, I want you all to know how important this is. You know, it's important enough that everything that Lao Tzu speaks of in the Tao Te Ching, and everything that Zhan Song Feng speaks of in the classics of Tai Chi Chuan practice revolve around a life lived without bringing harm to others. Lao Tzu couches that in the context of having a more peaceful, more joyous, more beneficial, easier to live life. But I guarantee you, if your four neighbors are mad at you, your life is not peaceful to begin with. Zhan Song Feng couches his philosophy in the same set of teachings, but from the perspective of one should not do harm where harm doesn't need to be caused. Even Swinza, whose entire life was a study on the conduct of warfare, knew enough to not go into battle when it wasn't appropriate to do so. And all three of them knew, and in one way or another said, that when you operate from the perspective of your hurt and ego, you're gonna get in trouble. And so we learn to defend ourselves without intending to hurt or harm others. In our daily lives, understanding this philosophy helps us to have more peace and less conflict, more success in business, better relationships with other people, because we do a better job of managing the potential conflicts in our lives before they turn into problems. You know, we can only control what we do. Our choices and our actions, those are ours. We can't force another person to behave the way we wish they would. We can't make other people do what we want them to do. We may be able to force compliance for a while, but that never engenders goodwill and warm, fuzzy, peaceful feelings. That always creates a lot of problems. But what we can do is manage what we do. When somebody tries to bring a problem to our doors, we choose how we respond to the actions and words of other people. We choose how much of our ego we're going to put out there. We choose how badly we need to be right. And to the extent that we decide that we have to impose our feelings and will on others, we're going to continue to have conflicts and problems. When we can set that down, when we can put our pride down and back up a couple of steps and let the other person, quote, win the argument. Okay, somebody may have gotten loud and boisterous, and you know the appearance is they may have verbally beaten us, but you know what? We wound up not participating in a conflict. We wound up not having the problem. And I, for one, always have a little smile in the back of my mind when I don't have to get into a fight with another person, no matter what the nature of the fight is. They can have their moment if they want. Somebody else will yell back at them some other time. It just won't be me. I suggest for all of you, you don't let it be you either. Thank you all awful much. Thank you for letting me share with you, and I hope something I said was helpful to you. Have a great rest of your Sunday. Thank you.
Bill, thank you. Bill, your talk today, once again, has been totally clean, without any breaks, without any static. no audio cutouts whatsoever. So that was really nice.
Excellent. Let's keep using your thing.
I guess you talked me into it. Also, your talk today reminds me that you have experience in tournament fighting in your previous life.
Yes.
So, when it reminds me of what I have read when boxers would talk about an upcoming fight, and the boxers themselves and their trainers, they would talk about all kinds of, what they intend to do, their strategies or plans. I'll come in from the outside, I'll give them body shots. My uppercuts is, I'm going to rely on that. I have longer reach than he does, etc., etc. So they talk at length about that. And then there's always the seasoned observation that everybody has a plan before they get hit in the face.
Yes. And the truth.
Once they're struck, then it's like all the plans, all the strategies, all the tactics go out the window, and it's just like, wailing and instinctive, reactive, purely emotion, rage-driven actions from that point on. Can you comment on that?
Absolutely. I've never heard it put quite that way, and I'm sorry it just tickled me. But that is so true. It really is. And I've been there. You think about, what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? Where's this guy's strengths and weaknesses? And then that first punch catches you in the face, and it all goes out the window. It's all over.
Mm-hmm.
As long as a person thinks from that perspective, the absolute truth is sooner or later they're going to get hit in the face. When you stop thinking about it from an emotional perspective, when you stop trying to plan for what might happen and simply respond to what does happen, then you stop getting hit in the face.
Fascinating. So what about training and techniques and practice? What role do they play in helping someone handle the sudden impact of getting hit in the face and still maintain their composure?
Well, it has a lot to do with it, of course. At some point, you have to learn technique. You have to build the foundation for your martial practice somewhere, and that always starts with forms or kata or whatever they call the forms practice in whatever style you're practicing. Without that foundation, there's nothing on which to support one's fighting skill. But the farther one advances down that martial path, the less a person should be focused on a particular set of scenarios, and the more focused they should be on perfecting their technique, perfecting their practice, and responding to what happens when something happens. Life doesn't come at you in scenarios like, life's not a kata. It's not. It isn't a tournament with a script and rules. You may be looking for that shot to the face while your opponent's getting ready to kick you in the groin. You got to be able to hit from where you are.
So can we bring these ideas back to living life, cultivating the Tao? So, if I compare being hit in the face or a groin strike, for instance, to the sudden impacts that sometimes, life can deliver to us, setbacks, things that happen that maybe I don't really like, but that shook me up. What kind of practice or techniques, in my cultivation would come in handy for me to maintain my composure?
I'm with you. Sorry. Oh, goodness. Anything that we do in the way of cultivating a centered spirituality and compassion, anything that we do that results in a reduction of the ego self, anything that we do that calms the emotions, that settles negativity and prevents the reflexive knee-jerk reaction, are the things that are going to be helpful there. And the reason that I'm not being real specific on that list is that there are a variety of things that we do. Meditation, for instance, Qigong practice, Tai Chi Chuan practice, pardon, that help people to get centered and calm and focused on their spirituality. And I don't know how everybody else chooses to pursue that. I use meditation, Qigong practice, my Tai Chi practice to help reduce the ego self, to keep myself calm and centered, and to try and let go of things. I'm going to tell you, I still have a hard time when I'm driving. but those things all help to remove the emotionalism and that knee-jerk emotional reaction or response to the surprise attack, if you will, that it is so easy to evoke in some people.
Yeah, and it seems to me that this would be even more useful to most of us, because after all, we're not all going to become tournament fighters like you were once upon a time, but we're constantly in the boxing ring of life, so to speak, and from all different directions, whether at the workplace, driving on the road, or encountering road rage, and metaphorically being hit in the face all the time.
Yeah, and I was hoping I conveyed that in the last couple of slides, but if that didn't come across, thank you very much for helping to do that, because that truly is the focus of this set of talks.
Let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual, everybody. 起立，面向佛堂，持架3鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，3鞠躬，持架多一点传世1鞠躬，接班1鞠躬。We are done, everybody. Thank you so much.